Hello and welcome to this episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. Today we're going to be looking at how you should be looking after yourself as a teacher or school leader, and also looking at changing culture so that staff don't burn out. Because I have Sarah on with me today, and she and I have slightly scarily similar burnout stories as school leaders. And we are both passionate to help anyone listening to start to look for warning signs, to notice things that are not right, and to do something about it before you burn out, because we've both burnt out. We don't want it to happen to you. So, welcome, Sarah. Thanks for coming on today. Do you want to tell listeners a little bit about you and your story?
I can. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here to tell a little bit of the story. So I'm Sarah Hussey and I have worked in education. I think my first job in education was around 1994, which shows how old I am. And I was a midday supervisor at that point, and I was studying for my degree and had two small children. In fact, I think I might have had one then. But the point is, I've been working in education for a long time in different roles. I started teaching in the year 2000 and then got my headship in 2010, so 10 years into my career, proper teaching career. So I loved school. I loved teaching. I absolutely adored being a leader. I loved creating a place where people felt valued, and that was staff, pupils, parents. People would often comment on what a lovely feel the school had when they walked through the door. You know, it was just one of those places that I was very proud of it. You know, we had all sorts of things. We had a Labrador called Betty, who we got at 11 weeks old, who was wonderful with the children, you know, forest schools, the whole, you know. It was an interesting journey because I took on an outstanding school that wasn't, you know, hadn't been touched by Ofsted in a long time. So we had the bumpy outstanding to RI and then back to good and then another good. So 12 years in that school, and burnout hit in really December 2022, but I think it started way before then. But the big events were, we had an Ofsted on the 14th and 15th of November 2022, which isn't lost on me ever that it was the same 2 days that Ruth Perry had. In the build up to that inspection, I think things had changed around inspection. I think there was a very negative feel from schools that were being inspected, both nationally and then it happened locally to a couple of schools. So my confidence and it's okay, I know my school inside out, the staff are brilliant, you know, kind of started to dwindle. So anyway, so I've got a history of high blood pressure, I've got a history of depression, you know, like a lot of people who are on medication. So my blood pressure was rising pre-inspection, and I was having some coaching with Dr. Emma Kell, who I know you've had on the podcast. She's incredible. And so I was starting to look at what could I do next, you know. I didn't think I was unwell. I just thought that, you know, maybe I was a bit tired and needed a new challenge more than anything. We had the inspection. It was fine. We kept our good. And normally after that, you kind of celebrate and life goes on. I didn't really feel like that. I felt that, I don't know. I think there was a lot of things that were said and a lot of questions that were asked that were unnecessary. I felt like my staff felt really knocked by it. And I felt for the first time in my headship that I didn't actually have all the answers for them. I couldn't give them everything that they needed because things had changed so much. Anyway, to cut a long story short, around the end of November, I was still struggling with lots of difficult things in school. We had lots of stuff going on. And I went to Osborne House with my year one class and their lovely teacher. And on the bus on the way home, I started to feel a bit odd. I had pins and needles in my arm, in my left arm, and a bit of tightening of the chest. And, you know, jokingly, I thought my bra was too tight. And, you know, I just couldn't wait to get my pajamas on when I get home, you know. And so that was a Thursday. I phoned the doctors, and on the Friday I was asked to go up for an ECG. I couldn't possibly. I had a sharing assembly to do. I had parents to meet. Anyway, dragged myself up there at lunchtime. They didn't like what the ECG was saying. And then I think I spent the next 14 days in and out of hospital. I live on the Isle of Wight. So at one point I was blue lighted to Portsmouth to a hospital there. And I'd had a string of small cardiac events, as they like to call them, and they thought that I was on well on the road to having a bigger one. So they kind of stopped that from happening, which was wonderful. But the bottom line was that really happened because of the stress of the job, that there was no other indication as to why I would at 52 be in that position. So yes, so finally, when I was home and on all the right medication, I'd done cardiac rehab, I wanted to go back to school, but I found, Rena, that I tried and couldn't, ended up back in hospital. And I don't know to this day whether that was chest pain through anxiety of being in the building, or if it was more of the same. However, it's interesting because since I've left that school, and I'm doing other jobs and other work in leadership, my heart is healthy. My last MRI scan said there was no damage to it. So isn't that an interesting thing to think?
Yeah, I guess one question I have is, so when I had to leave my job because of my symptoms, which were very physical, I had the risk of they kept thinking maybe I was having a heart attack, which I wasn't. And then I lost vision in one eye and, lost feeling in my limbs sometimes and all sorts of things. But when I had to finish my job, I felt such a failure. It was stress, and it wasn't a broken leg or, something that sort of the world sees as being a real problem. I felt a real failure. I felt shame. I felt guilt at letting my team down. Did you have that?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I wrote a blog about it a few months later, which got so much attention because that was the thing, that I really did feel like I had failed. I'd worked so hard from that, young mum on her own, doing her degree, to be a teacher, then to be a head, and I'd worked so hard, and I felt like myself and my team had created a really, really good school, and it was great. And then it stopped. It was taken away from me. And I felt, and do you know what? I felt I had no sense of purpose. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I was more depressed than I think that I've ever been in my life. It needed a lot of support around that. And I completely understand people who feel like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that's why we're both on a mission to help leaders and teachers so that they don't do what we did. But if I knew then what I know now about my habits, my mindset, listening to my body, I mean, I still find sometimes I wake up in the night and I can feel the tightness in all the muscles in my face, and I can feel my shoulders are up like this. And, we have to learn to notice what is our body doing and how is our body feeling, apart from all the other things, our boundaries and our people pleasing and all the other things that, and as I know you've written a book called Compassionate Leader, and I love that because actually, I'm proud of the fact that I'm kind, I'm compassionate, I'm empathetic. That's me at my core. But that's what made me a good leader, a good teacher. But actually, it's also part of what caused me to burn out.
Absolutely. So teachers, head teachers, doctors, anyone who works in the caring profession, we run the risk of suffering from compassion fatigue, which is something I looked at when I was writing the book. And, I say to people now when I'm coaching them, if you feel a sense of, I can't make any difference anymore anyway, I can't change anything, then you are well on your way to compassion fatigue. And yes, I was really proud of being a compassionate leader and listening to people. But it's easy to say now that there were times when I should have put more boundaries in. There are times when the open door policy shouldn't have been open all day long, because there are times when you just need that space yourself. And it was through being coached that I learned some of those things, that I learned that you have to put yourself first at times as well. And that's really hard.
Yeah, it doesn't come naturally to all of us, does it? And actually, in my experience of learning that as a skill, with people who know you, if you do put that boundary in and choose that actually sometimes you have to put yourself first and others can't have that space, they can be quite angry with you. They don't like that change in you because it doesn't suit them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember one of the things I think that stood out with COVID times. I think a lot of things changed for school leaders in COVID, after COVID. was the communication bit, was because you didn't have all your pupils and all your parents in school. There was a lot of communication and emails and phone calls, and it got to the point where school community felt that it was okay to email you on a Sunday morning at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, all of those kind of things, and even staff. So one of the things that I say in my book, and I did do this after COVID, was that we had a very clear communications policy, and that was, staff will not respond to your emails straight away. We gave them a 24, 48 hours frame, time frame, unless it was a safeguarding issue. And also for staff, I appreciate you all work different hours, but don't send an updated action plan to the team at 9 o'clock because that's when you've been doing it. Just schedule send for the next day. Nothing is so important that people have to see it there and then. Because it just became the norm that people could send you really angry emails about nonsense, actually, at night time or at your weekends, and demand that you respond to them. And, that's just crazy when you look back on it, but it became normal, didn't it?
Yeah. And I spoke to one person, probably on here actually, who said before he sends an email, he always asks himself, could I go and have a conversation with that person instead?
Yeah.
And one of the things, I keep talking about it on here, I know, but I have this lovely course called 5 Minutes to Thrive. So it's 5 minutes at the start of every staff meeting. And one of the weeks is on looking at, are you just reacting to something someone said, or are you pausing, reflecting, and then coming back to them with a different answer? And there's two very simple words you can use, why or what. So if I say, why did you say that to me, Sarah? Why are you being so lacking in understanding? Or if I say, what's underneath what Sarah is saying here?
Absolutely.
And it gives you a whole different response. And that goes for emails, it goes for conversations with colleagues, parents, children, partners, everybody. And it's a really, really powerful tool. And actually, I had a psychotherapist when I was doing a talk at a conference last week who said to me that, she knows all about that from her workspace, but she'd never thought of using it on her own children, who are very challenging. And actually, for me, that is just beautiful, isn't it? Because we learn these new habits, these new skills, and we can apply them all over the place. So it impacts our families as much as it's going to impact school and ourselves.
I think communication is so vital in so many ways. And I do talk about it in the book. And one of the best things that I ever learned, I was lucky enough to do some work with Dr. Stephen Peters, the chimp paradox. A few years ago, we had someone really forward thinking at the local authority, and he was Dr. Peters was talking at a conference, and then his team came and did training with school leaders, which I absolutely loved. And there are things in that book and things that we learned on that course that I still use. But it's those simple things about the idea that, your brain is part chimp and part human, and you have to ensure that when you're in a room with other people who are cross or upset and their chimps are out, that you have to be the human in the room, even though you don't feel like it sometimes. You have to. And I'll admit that when I was first a leader, I was very chimpy. I was very reactive. I was like, no, this is my school and this is how we're going to do it, and you need to listen to me. And I've learned over the years that actually every meeting that you have, you need to start with, what do I want from this? What do we want? Because there's always going to have to be a compromise. If these parents are angry, I have to see their perspective. I have to let them talk. I have to let them let their chimp out first in a way that it's acceptable before we can discuss and move on. And I think some of those things that I learned that were really important. And like I said, I talk about them in the book, but also you have to I think sometimes there were people on my staff, I think sometimes, that thought that I could be a bit soft, and they felt compassionate was soft. So when there was parents that were heated and shouting, and I would take them into my office and calm them down, and, it was almost like they expected me to shout back, to be that, person and say, no, this is not acceptable. You can't talk to my staff like this, which I did say, but in the right place in the meetings when those people were calm. And I think it's understanding where those bits come in, isn't it? And not be reactive. not to be reactive at
Yeah.
all. Otherwise, you get nowhere.
No, you don't. So, can I ask you to give a couple of top tips from your experience for school leaders, teachers who are listening to this and they're in a situation where perhaps you were before Ofsted, um, when you could sense that things were a struggle. So if life is really hard, what would you be giving top tips to somebody?
I think one thing is that you have to accept that there are only some things that are in your control, which I found very hard to do, which I'm very good at now. And I know, when you have coaching or when, you'll have the circle of control. And I think you need to accept that there are some things that are out of your control. I think you do need to be the leader you are supposed to be, not the leader other people want you to be. And B, we use the word authentic a lot. I'm not sure that everyone knows what it means, but to be your true authentic self, talk to people, make sure your staff are okay. Little gestures go a long way. When I've spoken to people interviewing for the book, speaking to teachers, one of the things they say about culture in a school is sometimes we would just like to be thanked. Sometimes it's just nice for someone to say, I've noticed that you did this, or the way that you dealt with those parents, or that meeting that you did. We're no different to the children. We all want to feel valued. So, I don't know. Top tips are difficult, aren't they? You can only control some things. You need to keep a sense of perspective. You need to remember to laugh. And you need to remember that we are all flawed, but we are all human. And that's wonderful. Schools are full of people. From the age of 4, you could have governors in their 70s and 80s. We're all human. And that's what we're working with. Not robots, not machines, people.
Yeah, I love that because I think sometimes we forget that particularly head teachers are human because they don't appear it all the time, but they are completely human. We all are. And interestingly, when you talk about people wanting to be thanked, and obviously a lot of what I do is based around understanding our value and building our self-awareness. And one of the things that I love, the pieces of research I found, was that we need 5 to 1 positive to negative interactions through our day in order to be in a place of flow or thriving, flourishing. So that could be, if you look at your day, the negatives are pretty prevalent, frankly, in school, because we only hear, oh, Rowena, I can't believe you didn't get to see that child today. I really needed you to talk to them. And, oh, by the way, you didn't finish that report. And, you didn't eat your lunch. But actually, a positive can be a smile. It can be someone holding a door when you're struggling with your bags. It can be, someone telling you you've got a piece of ketchup, on your face. It doesn't need to be big stuff or saying
No.
thank you for, bringing my kids in from the playground. But 5 to 1 is what we need to flourish.
And I think sometimes as leaders, you have to go and find them, because otherwise you are going to be in your office reading negative emails, taking phone calls from parents that aren't happy, having staff come in to say their lessons aren't going well. Can you come and help with this person who's dysregulated? And of course you can. That's, you should be doing that. But sometimes you have to look for the positive. So sometimes actually, when you're on the gate, don't always be hijacked by the parents who want to tell you that once again they didn't get a communication about PE day changing. Go and talk to the people that you don't see a lot of, because if you go and say to them, hi, are you okay? How are things with your child in school? You'll get some really nice feedback, because you don't get that sometimes unless you go and ask. So be brave enough to say, is there anything we can do to help you? Is your child's experience good? Or, because when you do send the surveys home, what you get is people who want to tell you how to do your job or how to do things better. You very rarely get we love the school. We love how compassionate everyone is. We love the fact that you know the name of every child. We love the fact that you're always there in assembly, all of those kind of things. You don't get that, so go looking for it. I would get your ego a little bit, rubbed, because otherwise we just don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I speak to teachers and it's exactly the same, but actually we need to be looking for it. So you need to be noticing. And the key piece of research on this is that you need to notice and hold it for 20 seconds for it to internalize. So if it's just a sweeping, you notice a child smile at you because they're grateful for something, that's great. And it's positive. But actually, if you then go and journal about that before you go to sleep that night, you've internalized it and it's got long-term positive impact. And that for me is really pivotal in how we address the positive and negatives in our day and look at the gratitude and the habits and all that sort of thing, the mindsets, because I don't know if you know, but we have 80% of our thoughts are negative. And if you reckon that we have between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day, that's an awful lot of negative thoughts, and the majority are the same as yesterday. So we have got to be changing our mindsets. And I think as educators, day in, day out, we're in a class or in an environment of reactivity and chaos and fast-paced everything, dealing with often difficulties and less often celebrations. So our minds can very easily go to that negative place, can't they?
Well, I always say when I'm coaching people, would you talk to your loved ones in the way that you talk about yourself in your head? I know that's an old classic, but it's true. And when I'm doing it to myself, I do that as well. I mean, I have the added complication that I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. So I don't just have one negative thought or one negative voice. I have like 5 going at once, So that's different too. But I also say to people, when coaching, you've got your to-do list and it's massive. On a Friday afternoon, why don't you write down what you have done? Because you'll have a huge list of things that you have done. Some of them weren't even on Monday's to-do list, but there were things that needed to be done. They came up, you dealt with them brilliantly, and the outcome was positive for everybody involved. But because they weren't on Monday's to-do list, you don't consider them as a job well done. So flip that and think, okay, what have I achieved this week? And sometimes you'll realise that you have actually done a bloody good job.
Yeah, you've done a lot. You mentioned there, Sarah, that you got a diagnosis of ADHD. Did that help you as an adult? Because we've had one other person on here very near the beginning of my podcast, a man who said that when he came out saying that he had got his diagnosis as an adult, that was actually very helpful for him. Has it helped you?
In many ways, it's been a really positive experience. I think there's always, and I speak to people, particularly women who have had late diagnosis, that there's a little bit of grief always about being someone you weren't really sure who you were. And so, you couldn't be yourself at certain times in your life. I think for me, it explains my own kind of quite negative experiences in secondary school, my own impulsive decisions when I was a young woman, but also it explains, I think, as well, some of my real negative emotions about how I always felt as a school leader that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't fit in, that I wasn't. And I think possibly I used to think that came down to the fact that I started as a dinner lady, as it were, but I was always supposed to get good exam results. It wasn't like, it's just that completely messed up at school. So yes, I think in many ways it's really empowering, and as well as being compassionate about leadership and ensuring people stay in their job, it's another thing of mine to ensure that if you've got neurodivergent staff or you're a neurodivergent leader, you also advocate for yourself, because I wish I'd done that more. And I only got diagnosed because my eldest daughter did, and she was 28 when she got diagnosed, and I'm a teacher. She has autism and ADHD, and we didn't get a diagnosis for her until she was 28. I mean, that's shocking, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure it is, because I don't think we can see things in our own children that we can see in someone else's. So maybe let that one go. But
yeah, maybe.
Could I ask you a question? So I had a leader who said to me the other day, I'm just not good enough. I can't be good enough. I can't be enough. And you've obviously experienced that. What would you be saying to that person today? Teacher, leader, doesn't matter.
I think that, and I do always struggle a little bit with giving advice as that I'm no longer ahead, but I am still working in school leadership. I coach people on leadership journeys. I'm also working with trainees. I'm kind of doing every part of the school system, as it were. But I always know that, okay, I'm not doing it anymore, so it's easy for me to say. But I think what you, first of all, you need to think about your idea of what good enough is. Stop thinking and stop taking on board what everybody else says good enough should be as a school leader. And what do you want to be? What do you want your legacy to be as a leader? And it doesn't have to be massive. It's just about running a really good school where children enjoy what they do and staff are listened to and valued. You know, if you write down your values, what you think is good enough, and then just keep referring to them, not to everybody else's, because, you know, the one thing I've learned in headship is that there are an awful lot of people who the only knowledge they have about school is the fact that they went themselves. But they are experts at telling everybody else how to do the job that you do. So don't listen to those people. Listen to yourself and what you think you need to be doing in your school.
I love that. I hope someone's heard that today, because I think there's people on here who need to hear that. Sarah, thank you so much.
You're
If people
very
want to find out more about you, where would they find you? And can you give the title and things of your book?
I can. So I do have a website because my business is called Possibilities and Perspectives. Can you see I even struggle to remember that myself, because it was far too long a name for a business. But you will find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Hussey, and my book that I've been working on for probably a year will be published by Routledge, which I'm very excited about. The Compassionate Leader, Shaping Schools with Kindness, Courage and Purpose is the long title of the book. It will be published on the 8th of December. So by the time this goes out, it will be out in the big world, and you'll find it on Waterstones, Taylor and Francis, Amazon. But yeah, look me up on LinkedIn and connect with me, because I'm still very involved and very busy and really enjoying it. But I really want people to do the job and stay there. Really do.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Sarah. And we'll put those links into the show notes. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks everyone for listening today.